Jeff York of The Establishing Shot. This is our first time solo together. You hung out with us on some Scarathon live streams last month, but now it's just you and me, which is appropriate because we're talking about a movie with very few cast members
That's right.
and mostly centered on two. We're gonna have like a little bromance here, talking about Wally, or Wally, as I like
Nice.
to
Very
say.
good imitation. Yeah, in
That's
fact, I have to say, Ian, before we get into Wally, I feel honored to know that I've been your guest 3 out of the last 4 weeks now. I'm kind of expecting to be a regular and maybe even move in with you. I'm just saying.
there's
The
not
next step is
see
us moving in. We're bromances. I want to check out all your pop vinyls and your shelves of great books. It's
here's a little movie magic secret though, Jeff. See the boundaries of this screen. This is essentially all the room I have to live in my
That's
house.
it.
So
That's
yeah,
it. Some people have their parents' basements. Ian has his parents'
it's a
closet. It's a very
it's
well lit closet, but nonetheless.
well, thank you. It's all the camera. Yeah. Um,
But thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be part of this. Been a fan of your show for a long time, and it's been really, really terrific being a guest.
well, thank you, and I've loved having you on, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you about Wally because I found out when I asked you if you'd be interested in talking about this. This was your favorite film of 2008. Not only is it the Academy Award winner for Best Animated Feature of that year, but it's you put it at the top of your list. So let's people I assume have seen Wally, they know what it's about. So we'll get into that, but I want to know about your history with Wally. What was it that really stuck with you about this movie to make it your favorite of that year?
Well, you know, it's one of those that really worked on so many levels. I mean, I think, first of all, I think the daring of Pixar to do it, which, virtually that first half hour was almost like a silent movie. I mean, there were some sound effects, but this sort of sad sack, almost Chaplin-esque kind of character, just kind of going through these physical bits, and he's limited in his range, but still there's that humor and bits of Keaton and Harold Lloyd and all those things going on in there as well. Um, I also think it was very political and it was ballsy for that. I think it had uh, great message and sort of the shock of the human beings looking like chubby cartoon balloons at the end. I kept thinking, wow, this is inconsistent because they started with Fred Willard and now they're all looking like cartoons. Oh, that's how we progressed into these awful caricatures of humanity. Um, but I also think it was at a time when Pixar was really doing incredibly daring stuff. I think the year before that, or maybe 2 years before that, they did Ratatouille, and I
Mhm.
couldn't believe that they made an entire movie that was so appetizing about food, and it's all rats, and when they're all in the kitchen at the end, making that meal for the critic, it's like, oh my god, it's like, thank god this is animated, because if it was real, I would, even Ernest Borgnine would not be able to get me to watch. um,
Yeah,
uh,
let's just hope that they don't that Pixar, well, Disney is Pixar now, that they don't go the live action remake route
right.
for Ratatouille or any of these movies. They need to
Oh,
stay as their 3D
yes,
animated
and I
selves.
think they're making a mistake doing that anyway, but that's another topic, I suppose. And for me, it was just like so touching and involving, and this very specific small little story about this machine, and it was, like I said, almost felt like a silent movie and stuff. It just dazzled me, and I was so taken in by it. And I think it was Pixar at kind of the peak of their ability to make us see things differently, and the way they brought computer animation to the fore, and then they showed rats as characters who were foodies, and then here is this limited guy. And I mean, I'll give you an example of, I just think that the cool and the daring of Pixar at that time, and maybe that's just sort of accumulated, but they take that song from Hello Dolly, It Only Takes a Moment, sung by Michael Crawford before he was the Phantom of the Opera, and it touches your heart and makes you cry and kind of gives that song a whole new meaning. And of all the songs to pick out of a movie, like Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas from Meet Me in St. Louis would have been perfect because it gets you anytime you see it. But this song is kind of like, okay, that's kind of the corny romantic song in that fun show, which isn't too heavy. and it just devastates you here. And so for me, I think sometimes when movies really devastate or really just kind of rip your heart out, it has a great impression. So that might be all those kind of factors I think contributed to being still my favorite Pixar movie, and I think the greatest film of 2008. Especially, I mean, we shouldn't hold it against an animated film. Well, an animated film can't be that. That's why there's best animated film. Screw that. It was for me the best film that year, and if a horror movie is the best film of the year, I'll give it that too. I think great movie is a great movie, and this is one of them.
Yeah, agreed. Now, I had only seen Wally twice. I saw
Oh,
it in the theater in
mhm.
2008, and then I
Yep.
saw it uh last night.
There you go.
Actually, I watched it in two parts the night before, and then I finished it last night because just the way my schedule is. By the way, shameless plug. This is, talk about pioneering Pixar. Criterion put out this is, I
Yeah.
think, their first collaboration with Pixar,
Yep.
a 4K Blu-ray set, which
Yeah.
got a ton of like extra features and stuff on it. And it really, like, watching it again with some distance. I mean, we're talking like what, 16 years ago or whatever it is. I can't do
Right.
math.
Right.
Um, but I had forgotten how much you mentioned it's a political movie. I mean, it's definitely politically or socially conscious,
Right.
and I had forgotten what had happened to Earth,
Hmm.
because we think of it as, we're the blue planet. When we see it, it's all like brown,
Yeah.
and you go through, you kind of zoom in to the planet, you get this tour of America, and it looks like it's got all the palettes of like the Mad Max Fury Road, like desert scapes. Like, what
Hmm.
happened here? Is this the aftermath
Right.
of a nuclear war? And the
Right.
horror of it is, no, it's just the byproduct of rampant consumerism, like,
Right.
and
Right.
pollution drove humanity off world to explore the stars. And not even, it's just interesting the angle that they take, because it was co-written by director Andrew Stanton, and Pete Docter worked on the story.
Hmm. Hmm.
um we've seen movies about, like, well, people had to leave Earth, so they go and colonize some other planet. This is just, they go into this giant resort spaceship and hang out until the pollution levels are clean enough to come back. But
Right.
the planet is so far gone that it takes more than 700 years for them to get the okay to return home. Like, who comes up with these ideas? It's fascinating to think about now, even more so than, when I was much younger. I was just paying attention to the animation. This time I was much more interested in the story, and, to quote, I think it was Gene Siskel, how the movie was about what it was about.
No, you're exactly right. In fact, I think one of the great things about Pixar is that at the end of the day, they're not great cartoonists or people who've changed animation, which they've done all that, of course. They're great storytellers, and I think the form of doing it in animation allows them to be great storytellers because they're a little under the radar, because we're not necessarily expecting it. Maybe sometimes because we think of animation and cartoons as children's stories, that they can be very adult and surprise us and get attention that way. But I also think, this from being an artist and being at the American Academy. Pencil tests and all the different tests and the animation takes time. So, they're living with a joke that maybe wasn't the greatest joke for 3 months. And they can say, I've had 3 months to think about how to make that better. Where if you're shooting it that day, you got to get in the can. 2 days later, you think, I got a better joke. We should have done this one. You probably don't have that chance because you've moved on. In animation, you got a little more time to make it great. And I think they always probably push it as they're going along to it. But this movie to me had such balls to it, just for the fact that it's basically indicting humanity as being not only slovenly and lazy, but they gave up. Like, it's not just, oh, they've ruined the planet, fuck it, we're out of here, we can't do anything, we just have to go away and come back when somehow it fixes itself. It's like George Carlin, save the planet. I'm not worried about the planet. The planet will be fine. We're fucked, and it's kind of true. Like, the planet somehow survives, even if it's not anything more than a rust bucket, but it survives. Humanity, not so much. But the fact that they put that in a movie and all kinds of families and audiences saw it and loved it and made it a big hit, that's audacious.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely want to talk about it. I was going to save it to the end, kind
Cool.
of where it goes into the movie, but let's just break into it now. I slightly disagree. I think it is a more hopeful version of humanity than I think would have been if someone were to make Wall-E today. I don't think we'd get the ending of this movie
You're right. Eh,
because you think about like 2008 is when it came out, so they were
right.
creating it in probably 2006, so 7, maybe even earlier than
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
It's just as a side note, it's funny to see Eve, the robot, the kind of the sentry that comes down to see if there's life on the planet. She looks like an Apple product. I
She
mean,
sure does.
we do see like a dated an iPod, right?
Yep. Yep.
That Wally plays music on, and like that was the peak of Apple back then
Yes.
because the
Yes.
iPhone had just come out. But yeah, Eva as Wally calls her,
Right.
but her name's Eve.
Right.
She looks like the future of Apple. Like what we have come to know about Apple was like right there in 2008. I wonder if if
Don't you
Steve
think the
Jobs and his
ear
company
the
saw that.
earpods have been influenced for the earpods have that same white sort of kind of shiny, gleamy, curved sort of shape to it. But no, I actually agree with you, Ian. It's very hopeful. I mean, to pitch it as like, okay, it starts with this poor little waste waste allocation load lifter, I think is what Wally stood for. And
Yeah, very
he's
good.
he's been abandoned too. It's like, and over the years somehow he's evolved into kind of a person, or as close to a person as there's left. And Americans and the world, humanity, just we're out of here. But you're right. At the end, they finally get it and they come back. And of course, they have that extended end credit sequence where you see them actually doing the work and getting thinner and coming back. So it is ultimately very positive, very hopeful. And, we knew you had it in you, just like those voters last week. We knew you could do it. If we said it long enough and hard enough, you'd realize we were democracy's on the ballot. Um, but up until then, it's like, wow, they are just sorry we're out here. We just leave our mistakes.
Well, and that's the thing is
That
like
was
that's why I said
extraordinary.
well, if it were to be done today, well, first of all, I noticed that the kind of the balloon people that humanity became when they got on this resort ship, the Axiom,
Yep.
that sort of became a meme. I remember there would be references to people saying like, "Yeah, we're all going to end up like they did in Wall-E, just kind of floating around on chairs." And they were constantly addicted to their screens.
Yep.
These virtual view screens that were like literally inches from their face.
Yep.
My issue, it's not so much an issue because you couldn't have predicted where this stuff would go in the almost 2 decades since, but we've become as a as a species almost so addicted to devices, to distractions,
Mm-hmm.
to entertainment
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like if we were on that spaceship now and someone said, "Hey, we could go back to Earth and rebuild," you're like, "Wait, you mean get off the spaceship, put away our screens, and plant things and build stuff? No,
There's
we're
going to be
staying
work
here."
involved. Work involved. I don't think so. Everybody else looks like me. I don't feel that. No, you're right. That would have probably been maybe a darker, more cynical time for it. This was right around the time of Obama, so maybe there was hope and change, or somebody thinking that things are going to get better. But yeah, you're right. It ultimately ended up being very hopeful. But it's interesting too, because I think the counter to that, of course, is Wally, who is a scavenger. He's just finding junk, and yet he still finds a purpose for it because that's him. He still has a purpose, and maybe it's to simply collect what's left of our soul in various places, where it's that clip from Hello Dolly with Michael Crawford singing "It Only Takes a Moment" as a love song, or this doodad or this thing, and sort of collect it all like it's sort of a scrapbook of things that were worthy of somehow putting in a scrapbook. I also love the fact that, like you almost wonder, like when Stanton was doing these means, you say like, okay, we just did rats and we have done other things. Now, what would be the least kind of character or critter that we'd want to be as our sidekick? I don't know, a cockroach. Yes. Like the thing that nobody likes. And they've turned him into this. And of course, but the great thing there too is, of course, the cockroach who cannot be killed. How many times does he run over and you think, oh no, no, while he's alone, he doesn't even have his little cockroach. It's like, no, that cockroach, he's been here for centuries. He's going to keep going on. I love the fact that they did that with him too. But I mean, the daring of that, it's like, we're going to take another gross little thing that nobody likes and make him lovable.
Well, it's also great because, again, kind of looking at it from an artist's eye, he's got this wonderful shape. He's almost like a perfect oval, except that his antennae don't quite, complete the circular shape. And he's just got this little squeaky kind of, not exactly a voice, but he makes little sounds.
Mhm.
He doesn't have the Disney sidekick of like, oh, he's gonna be a cute little rascal voice or something like that.
Right, right.
He's sort of like a little pet or a mascot. But if you do get a good look at him sometimes and you realize they put some cockroach-esque textures onto his wings and stuff, and like, just
Yes.
don't look too closely because I got a little grossed out by he was
Well, I'm
cute, but
sure
I was
that
away.
that new Blu-ray is probably gonna really make that. Wow, I didn't realize he was quite that elaborate. It's like when you see the Wizard of Oz on the big IMAX screen like they had years ago, and suddenly you see, oh wow, I can see where the hairline thing is, and you see that, oh, it's pretty rubbery pieces that Bert Lahr has, and oh, there's those fake holes with the hair. But that's what's so marvelous about it too, is you can sort of see, oh, I do see Ray Bolger's real chin in there somehow. They can't quite cover that with the rubbery burlap. So yeah, I think sometimes that kind of stuff, HD is both the viewer's great friend and sort of shocking friend.
One of the first Blu-rays I remember getting was Wally, and I was dismayed a bit because when I first put it in, I don't know if I had the motion smoothing on or what, but it looked at that had that soap opera effect. So it really
Oh,
did look like someone was moving toys around a set. I'm like, this
oh
isn't
wow.
animation anymore. This is just like model work.
Yeah, sometimes that weird print happens where it almost becomes a little bit video looking, and occasionally I'll see that with some live shows today too. It's like or sometimes it almost looks a little bit more filmic. It's just somehow the transfer or the way it's feeding into your streaming is a little bit odd. But yeah, I mean, what did you think of the fact that virtually most of the movie was kind of a silent movie? I mean, there were sound effects, there was a score, of course, but very little, uh, sort of traditional in points and stuff. I thought that made it really, because I didn't know where the film was going, and then they turned him into Charlie Chaplin, where he's so little trampish and kind of this underdog. And he did some of the, I mean, they must have studied some of the silent movie stuff, because there's bits of Harold Lloyd and Buster Keaton, and him going like, like coming back and looking around the corner or hiding or stuff like that. It was really well done the way they could make this machine into something that was anthropomorphic.
Yeah, I loved it. It was partially because it was so unlike a lot of the mainstream, animation that I'd seen. It was, as you called it, a very ballsy move to just have a junk robot roaming around a dead Earth for like 15 minutes until Eve shows up in the spaceship, and they don't tip their hand as to who she is or what she is,
Right, right.
because it's not exactly a cheat, but like the by and large corporation, which that's the big joke, is like they
Yes,
own literally everything on Earth,
right.
including the giant space vessel, the Axiom that everyone leaves on. So the ship that Eve lands in doesn't have any by and large markings on it. So you don't know until it docks with the by and large ship that it is part of
Right,
that vessel. So
right,
it's almost like, well, if we put the by and large logo on it, then it kind of tells you that it's people and not aliens. Because
right,
the first
right.
time you watch it, you're like, oh, he's going to be taken from Earth and follow this alien creature that he's in love with
Mhm.
to her planet or whatever.
Right.
um I'm kind of glad they didn't go that route, because the way they did, the direction they did take, I think was really amazing and kind of
Mhm.
touching. um but yeah, I not just the physical comedy, but the way they told the story, going back to Eve, when she comes down to the planet, she's constantly scanning things. whenever she encounters either the cockroach or Wally, she's constantly shooting at it because she's been trained to like blow up anything that tries to interfere with her
Right,
work.
right, right,
And then you're like, what is she doing? What is she looking for? And then she finds that little sprout plant and she
right.
puts it inside of her. And that's, I guess, transmitting and verifying that it is life. And then that means she can go home. Like none of that stuff is done in dialogue. We have to figure it out. And that keeping us on our toes, even when we meet some more human characters later, there's still a mystery as to like, what do they think of the situation they're in?
Mhm.
What's going to happen? You know, they do have the happy ending thing where like nobody on the ship is like complaining that they're going back to Earth to work. But it's still sorry, my laptop, my lower laptop light went off, so my lighting changed a bit. And now I'm glowing. Um,
I thought it
but
was a maybe a little homage to the scene where Wally and Eve are sort of floating and sort of amongst the mist and the sort of fiery lights and stuff.
I'm not that creative anymore.
You meant to do
Um,
that, Ian. Yeah, I meant to do that.
oh, it just occurred to me if you could look. Now this is gonna mean nothing for the audio
I
podcast
see him.
listeners.
I see him.
There's Wally up on my shelf right by my
I've
old television set.
I've got that toy somewhere. In fact, I was going to go dig it up. I thought, well, I didn't want to be that corny, I guess. But the fact that you just have it there is a part of your world is great. They didn't put that in the disc, did they? In the box?
No, this has been
Because
part
that
of
would
the
have been
set.
an easy thing to put there. They could have made a small one for everybody to have, and a little
Yeah,
knickknack on their desktop.
I want to say maybe one of the early home video releases they did do something like that. I don't know if it
Mm,
was a DVD or what, but yeah, I love the design of Wally.
yeah,
People said, "Oh, he looks like Johnny Five from Short Circuit." I'm like, well, maybe. He also looks a little bit like E.T., but it's all
definitely.
about the
Yeah.
character and what you do with it. I mean, he compacts trash into these little cubes, and one of my favorite scenes is where there's this open stretch of dirt and a giant junk mound, and he over time just compresses it into this like grid. And there's just something so simple and beautiful about it. Like this is a day in the life of this trash machine, and even though he's sentient, he doesn't seem to know anything, or he doesn't care that this is his lot in life. He's like
Right.
in between just being a machine and being enlightened. He's not one or the other.
Right. And how interesting, he's the contrast too of like he's doing the work. He is building this wall of garbage, but he is doing his job and taking care of his task, and then also finding these other little treasures along the way that sort of give him uh, pleasure when he comes home. And yeah, I'm with you. And I also get really upset when people say, well, that's like it looks like ET. They're clearly ripping off ET. It's like, look, there are ripoffs and then there are homages or inspirations. And what's wrong with inspiration homages? And um, I think everything is always kind of based on something else anyhow. Wasn't it Voltaire who said in the 17th century that nothing is original anymore, or 18th century, whatever century he was?
I mean, he even
Um,
stole that. No,
exactly.
no.
That's right. Somebody else said that. It was this working
Here's the
class
thing.
Joe that used to shine his shoes, and he stole it from him.
That was Joe Tear. No.
Oh, nice, nice.
But here's the thing: if anybody ever comes back at you with this BS argument of like, well, he was just a ripoff of ET, just say, well, maybe the human being who designed Wally was a big fan of ET
Mm-hmm.
and decided to build that into his creation. It's not
Right,
a ripoff.
right,
It's real world accurate to the reality of the Wally universe,
right.
maybe.
I've heard that excuse all the time about film composers, and there's people out there. I mean, even the movie Tar. Have you? There's a point in Tar where Kate Blanchett is knocking Jerry Goldsmith. I think we talked about this a little bit. I'm a Jerry Goldsmith fan, but it's like really, Jerry Goldsmith came in last minute and wrote the score for Chinatown in like 5 days and recorded it in two more, and it's the score from Chinatown. I think we can give these guys credit for being pretty brilliant and pretty fast. And if they use a little riff from Debussy or from Mozart over here, so be it. Who of us don't quote things or use inspiration from others? So I thought Wally was an incredible creation, and so much humanity, so much character, and yet very strict to what lenses can do, what wheels can do, what joints of a mechanical arm can do. They didn't give him too much stuff that was that he wouldn't be able to do. It was all very thought out. I mean, it's actually very scientific in many respects, including the way that they were showing the destruction of the planet. I think that was very well researched too on what would probably happen. And I remember even in thinking, like in Children of Men, it's like, yeah, it's just kind of decay. It just is like nothing gets picked up, and so everything kind of just becomes glazed over with dirt, and it's kind of
I
unusable then.
I was going to mention when I was talking earlier about the way they told the story, and it popped into my head and then popped right back out. So I'm glad you mentioned it. I thought of Children of Men while I was watching it this time too, because that's another brilliant, not only story but a brilliant piece of filmmaking
Right, right.
that is about essentially the end of the world, and they don't tell you what happened to cause mankind to go infertile. You get some clues here and there, like you'll see
Right.
a shot of the English countryside, and then wasn't it like a pig in a ditch? Like there was like this runoff of possibly toxic water or
Yep.
something
Right.
spilling into
Right.
a puddle. Like, well, that could be it too, mystery solved. But yeah, that's like Wally and Children of Men. There was really something going on around this period because they came out within a couple of years of each other, I think. Really bold, not hand-holdy storytelling, a big contrast to I guess this was Wally was the same year as Iron Man.
That's right.
So
It was.
which is another great, I think, pioneering big studio film that had a lot of ideas. And now
Hmm.
you fast forward 30 Marvel movies later, like comic book movies and comic book sensibilities have dominated the pop landscape, I think resulted in overall kind of weaker mainstream movies.
Well, you raise a number of interesting issues. I mean, I think the sort of daring and the willing to tell some of those stories. I mean, we get that a little bit. Like Don't Look Up was, a little bit of that dystopian story, but they're not as many as there were then. And even movies like Gattaca, I remember at the time, which was talking about genetic predetermination. Like, wow, that's a an issue right now. And here's this movie, a science fiction film that is taking that and running with it. And not explaining everything, but just like Children of Men and Wally, a lot of it is like, well, we can infer, looking around at what's going on in our world, that if left unchecked and exacerbated, it would end up like this. Um, and yeah, it was also funny. You bring up another point about like this is such a big hit, and this, if you'll remember, I don't know if you want to go there, if you were going to go there, but this and The Dark Knight were the reasons the Academy Awards changed, because everybody thought that Wally and The Dark Knight were going to get nominated for Best Film, and they didn't. And so the Academy said, like, well, we've got to expand it to 10. So these big popular hits, commercially hits, critical hits that are crowd pleasers, and Sasha Stone has been writing about this for over a decade in Awards Daily, that are both big hits and with critics and audiences, didn't get nominated. So they expanded the category, and essentially they still don't nominate these kind of movies. I mean, Black Panther is the only Marvel movie yet to be nominated for Best Film, as good as you could have probably. I mean, I'm surprised Endgame didn't get in there, as big a deal as that in the end of the first phase of Marvel. It didn't. It just as Iron Man wasn't even really considered a possibility, but Dark Knight and Wally were, and a lot of people picked them as one of their top 10, if not top 5 or top 1, like me. So Wally, was a game changer on a number of levels for Pixar and their ability to tell great stories without humanoid characters per se for the majority of the storytelling, but also for the fact that it was this great commercial and critical hit that somehow reminded us that the Academy really was not in touch with movie audiences anymore as much as they used to.
Right. And that's the weird thing is like we're so far beyond that now that we just think, oh, it's going to be 10 movies, that
Right.
quote unquote have a chance, whereas it used to be what, 5.
Right.
But it's like the Academy was like, instead of we're going to recalibrate our sensibilities and try and, as you say, get back in touch with what what audiences really want to pay attention
Right.
to.
Right.
And maybe even steer them towards, high art, but also maybe kind of appreciate what we might be considered low art and find the healthy middle ground. We'll just expand it to 10 so that we can say, hey, what was the top grossing film this year? Yeah, it's eligible for an Academy Award.
Right. And they've compounded that problem each year. But and then remember there was the talk for the last couple of years, and they finally abandoned it because it was so reviled by all corners of the world. But they were going to have the popular choice, and they still did something like that, though they kind of threw away. But it's not like an official. Here's the Oscar being handed to that person on camera. Um, but yeah, it's funny. I mean, in the days when they had 5 films nominated for best film, you would get critical and popular successes, and those were usually the ones that won best picture. That was kind of that criteria. Now it seems to be like the critics favorites, and if nobody's seen it, so be it. But and not saying there's anything wrong with a Nomad Land or some of those kind of films that are smaller films that are very good films that have won. But the fact that somehow the Academy didn't seem wise enough to nominate Wally, which was, I'm sure Rotten Tomato scores were like at 95 or something like that, I would think, and it made a ton of money, and yet somehow they don't nominate that. Silly.
Uh, it's a crime. One thing we're talking a bit about, like the portrayal of people and how that might have been different if it were done today. One of the things I thought was eerily prescient was once we get on board the Axiom, and the ship's captain, voiced by Jeff Garlin,
Jeff Garland, yeah.
to great effect. He's a character that we don't expect. We kind of think, by looking at him and the way he's sort of presented
Right.
initially, that we think we're kind of onto him, but he's got a lot more kind of complexity to him. He ends up sort of being a hero,
Right.
uh, and learning, hey, I've been kind of duped by by being in this stupor and looking at a
Yeah.
screen. I'm going to do the noble thing and try and save everybody, but he's at the mercy of the ship's wheel, the AI that runs the ship, that
Yes.
is sort of
We have
almost
to have a
anthropomorphized.
villain.
We do,
Right.
but what I
Auto. Yeah.
love is that and you talk about homages. This thing is Hal from 2001
Mhm.
stuck onto a ship's wheel from like an old pirate ship that's been
Right.
made over in the Apple image, right? It's all
Right.
white
Right.
and black.
Yes.
But if you think about it, there's that wonderful scene where the captain is kind of wondering how things got this bad, like how over 700 years no one checked up on Earth or whatever. And he's
Mhm.
looking at the portraits of the ship captains, and not only do they get, fatter as time goes on, but there's one constant in it, and that is the ship's wheel is in all of the portraits
That's
just
right.
over the shoulder, kind of mirroring or presaging what we have now, which our lives are all governed by algorithms, by
Right.
these machines that we've built to take care of us, but which are, kind of going out of control in a lot of ways, and having probably unintended consequences in many respects.
Well, and it's funny too. Michael Crichton was really onto something, wasn't he, when he did Westworld? Because it is sort of these machines sort of taking responsibility for so long that they ultimately finally say, "Damn right it is. It's my world. I'm the person putting in the work. I'm the person doing all this." Well, he develops a humanoid personality that is full of humanity and empathy and sadness and love and romance. Just as Otto becomes, a sort of an autocrat. He's not only the autopilot, but he's kind of an autocrat. It's like, you sons of bitches are just watching your screens and loafing around, and look at you, look at you. You look like a balloon. I'm the person who's even keeping you fed, because you, if you had to go out and get your own food, wouldn't even be able to get past the buffet line. Um, so yeah, he becomes this kind of angry, hostile, like, you're not going to screw my domain. I'm running this ship, and I'm running this ship. I also love the fact too that it reminded me a little bit of sort of the descent, going back to our horror discussion a couple of weeks back. But those humanoids underneath, they were supposed to be humans, just somehow ended up underneath 1,000 feet and never saw the light of day, and waited for food to come to them. So they developed these big bat-like ears. They're blind as a bat, and they're pale as anything because they don't have any sun or vitamin D or whatever it is. And here, like, it's like, when I first saw those chubby characters, I thought, wow, is this a continuity problem here? Like, did Wally suddenly turn into a cartoon where they were trying to establish that all this stuff was much more real? And then you see that long portrait of all those, the progression of humanoid captains into more and more inhumanoid with big eyes, and those parts of them becoming more dominant, that dominate the body, not no musculature and height and things like that. And I thought that was genius, that it's like, you want a cartoon, we're going to still do a cartoon here, but guess what, the cartoon here is humans turned into this because of their sloth for 700 years. I mean, that was just like the last aha. It was so great that they did that.
Well, and also there's that great scene where the captain gets into the restricted file and he sees, because Fred Willard shows up
Right,
in the
right.
earlier
Early.
parts, like
That's
on
right.
like the advertising screens and stuff, like, hey, it's by and large, and we're building this great new ship that everyone can go on. He shows up later in the movie in this restricted file, is sort of he's like the president of Earth, and he looks disheveled, he looks kind of
Mhm.
harried, he still has that salesman kind of a thing going on, but he's like, huh, guess what, our plan didn't work,
Yeah.
everybody.
Sorry.
You can't come back. um well, await further instructions. And he kind of
Right.
gets ushered off with his gas mask or whatever.
Mhm.
It's a dark little moment that you just
Mhm.
realize, wow, these were the end days.
Mhm.
And you wonder, if did he make it off, or had the ship, I can't, how do you interpret that? Was he maybe an early crew member on this thing and he's just dead for a few hundred years, or did he just not make it? I mean, I figured if anyone would go
Mhm.
on the X, it would be the president of the Earth.
Yeah, and I think that's they had this plan that didn't work out, and ultimately they were all stuck up there for much longer than they thought they were going to, and ultimately he probably died on that ship, or died in space like that. It reminded me a little bit too of, like, Don't Look Up was kind of that at the end, where they're adrift for how many decades, and they finally find a planet, and that, we screwed up, we went to the wrong planet. Boom, Meryl Streep is eaten. um but yeah, I mean, again, but that the dare I say, the gonads to do that and just say they didn't have the answer. That was a miscalculation. We all turned into these big cartoon blobs. Uh, it's like,
Well,
wow. I mean, you're right. They did have that redemption at the end, which is great. That's the arc, but they certainly make it go wow when you're watching that, because it's like they are not pulling their punches. They are saying, "Yep," and those corporations, they think they have the answer. They think they're the great savior. No.
well, on top of that, I mean, it's something that, we're sort of going through a micro version of this now, and I don't think the effects will be felt for probably decades. But you know what do people want to be now? They want to be influencers, they want to be
Yep.
famous,
Right.
they want to be on TikTok. The trades are dying.
Yeah.
That was one of the bits of, I think,
Mhm.
kind of subtle commentary of Wally, is humanity was kept alive, such as it was, in space, because everything was automated to the nth degree. They built machines that could kind of self-replicate and keep going and maintaining things for decades, because people just weren't doing that anymore. And
Right.
like,
Right.
we're running out of auto mechanics and engineers, and there's all these different openings in corporations that make things and
Mhm.
help keep us going for
Mhm.
as many bad things as they do. They are one of the reasons that we're still kind of afloat in an advanced civilization, but even that is in danger of going away, unless we start building Skynet style robots that are smart enough to replicate and keep things going. And but then what happens when they realize, hey, do we really need people?
No, you're right. I mean, they are becoming way too popular and efficient and under other things. And you're right. We're giving them the keys to the kingdom, because we don't want to do those jobs anymore. It's just it's almost like, if I was a parent today, I don't have children, but I was almost thinking, if you get to that point where, do I put aside $300,000 for them to go to college, and maybe they don't get a great job coming out of there, the way we learned, what is it, about 15 years ago, where suddenly your degree didn't mean that much. And that's why they even expanded the healthcare, so you can be on your parents' healthcare plan until you're 26, because these people were graduating college and not getting jobs, so they were living at home. But I would almost advise people to do exactly what you said, like, hey, it's a good profession that they'll always need plumbers, and some of those kind of guys, the guys who fix the trucks and the cars and trains, and engineers like that, because everybody wants to be famous. They want the easy bucks, the fastest lane to it. I mean, it's just crazy how many people think they're going to be famous on Instagram. If I can just get 1 million viewers each week, and then I will be paid money like Kendall Jenner or whatever. But we don't have those workers anymore. We can't even get restaurant waiters and waitresses, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, COVID killed the restaurant business by and large, and we still haven't figured out the minimum wage in this country. But I mean, one of the things that was interesting in Wally is that they were basically saying that these people don't want to work. They don't want to do this stuff. Wally's at the end of the day, a blue collar Joe, and even Eve is a hardworking scientist, two very admirable professions. The rest of people are just entertain me. They're professional audiences. Put
Well,
that
and
screen in
that's
front of them, and that's their job. I just want to be an audience. I just want to be entertained. And if I'm going to be anything, I want to be the person on the screen entertaining them, but doing less work. I mean, a 60-second TikTok video shouldn't be a profession, but it is these days. And a lot of people are making a very good living doing TikToks.
right. And I feel somewhat hypocritical because I'm not a plumber. I'm doing a YouTube video, which I do enjoy, and I enjoy the discourse, and I think I am contributing something, and I think we are contributing something, at
For
least to
sure.
the discourse. But something that just struck me about what you were saying is it's interesting because at the end the axiom has landed and everyone gets off and they're fascinated by Earth, and as you mentioned in the end credits we see that kind of progression of them rebuilding humanity,
Right.
but all of that entertainment and distraction is still on board the ship. So they
Mhm.
make a decision. It'd be great to like kind of see an in-between movie of Wally. Like, what was the civilization like? Were there people who are like, I we just want to go back on the ship? Or there's other people like, no, it's cool to build stuff. Or was there an in-between? Like, we can balance entertainment and hard work because that's kind of how we got into this predicament in the first place. If we're going to start over, we need to lay some new ground rules. So
There-
it's just a movie like this.
Mhm.
There's tons of stuff you can think about, and while you're not being bombarded with a bunch of like needless dialogue and pointless cutesy characters, it gives you room to think about the world that you are experiencing.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that's one of the great powerful things about science fiction is that hopefully you walk out of the film or and the reading of a novel in that genre, thinking about your own world, how it relates to it, and what is the rest of that world that maybe the author doesn't go into. To your point about what are they going to do if they get off of screens, I mean, who knows, maybe live theater comes back, live music, like actually going to a place and congregating with people to all watch it and share it together, and we don't record it, we're just experience it in the moment. uh Everything old is new again, and I think Wally sort of makes the argument for that. So yeah, there's always going to be the need for entertainment, but I would rather have people like us discuss a 2 hour movie that really has a lot of thought and is kind of the novel of today versus TikToks, which I'm not even sure what those are. I guess those are the MTV videos of today, where we don't even want to give you 4 minutes anymore. You've got 30 seconds, entertain me or you're done, or I'll scroll past you. Um, but and then nothing against TikTok. Some of it's very funny, and you can be moving with the cats and the dogs and the stories, or they can scare you a little bit with creepy facts and different things like that. But all these people are becoming influencers by, well, we're doing the dance move TikTok told us to do this month. Oh my Lord God, is that that's a living? That's people making a living.
It's funny because, well, first I was thinking when I was formulating my ideas about what would happen if this happened to, or if they made this movie today
Mhm.
and people got cut off from their screens. I think if you shut down TikTok in an afternoon, there'd be mass freakouts and probably suicide events, and just it would be bad. We'd lose Gen Z in an afternoon. Um, but the other thing I was thinking is I've made two TikTok videos, and I haven't made them in a long time, but I approached them as kind of creative projects because I
Sure.
think the ones I made were 3 minutes long. Because I think you can make like
Oh,
1 minute to 3 minute videos, and of
I
course
think,
the
yeah,
one
they've
minute ones.
expanded it now. Yeah.
Right, but the 1 minute ones are still the most popular because like, oh, it's only done in a minute. I've seen YouTube videos where people have apologized, like, "I'm sorry, I'm going really long on this one." It's like the video is you've been talking for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Isn't
Um,
that funny? We're so
but
short attention span.
it's gross. But the thing about TikTok is I put up a couple of like film criticism, kind of like little mini essays or just
Oh,
like
that's cool.
thoughts. And I put a lot of thought into them and I did take after take and I cut stuff together as a challenge to see how much good information can I pack into 3 minutes really.
Sure, sure.
So it's a challenge, but I don't think a lot of people consider it that way. It's not an artistic outlet. It's just, a content vehicle.
Yeah, and I think the unfortunate thing is too many people are willing to go for the lowest hanging fruit in that content vehicle. And some of it can be very entertaining. I mean, some of the dance challenges are, uh, there's one that's on TikTok now where people bang their head on a refrigerator and they go, and then it turns into staying alive, and it's 10 seconds. It's literally 10 seconds, but I've seen dozens of people doing them, or that's the challenge this month is to do this staying alive parody. And some of the people are better actors and they do the body language and they do the dancing well, but I would rather see something like you putting 3 minutes into a video, or putting some real effort into it. I mean, it's kind of funny, like YouTube was a half-hour show cut into 10 minutes or various versions of it that weren't as much of a lift. And now we've got TikTok. I mean, I know we had Vine. Remember when Vines were around? Those were 10 seconds you had to do a story in. Um, but yeah, and again, when you see Wally again, it suddenly makes you evaluate the world around us, like the generation and a generation that's grown up thinking they're all going to be famous. I mean, I used to work on kids brands and kids toys and stuff, and whenever we do focus groups on children and ask them, 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be famous. Well, that's not a job. Or we'd say, well, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I see myself being a famous influencer, or being a celebrity on YouTube or whatever. It's like, really? Do you know how hard it is to become a celebrity? I mean, you don't want to be an actor first and put in some work and study and do plays and then maybe get discovered?
Ew.
No,
Don't say the W word.
I know. That's just, but this movie makes you think about all that kind of stuff. Like, what are we doing now that is getting us ready to be having to leave the planet? And I'll just say one last thing, because I think, again, this film was very popular, because I think it was one of those that was also talking about global warming and just, sort of this disposable society and pollution and all this stuff that had building for years and years, and all those kind of things from decades ago. I mean, when I was a kid, they had the famous commercial with, was it Eagle Eye Cody, who turns and the tear comes down as he sees all the junk in the once great land of America in the West. But I think it was talking about that world at a time when we were kind of starting to have that conversation. And one of the things that worries me is, remember when it was about 6 years ago, they said we had 12 years to turn this around. Now, grant you, some of that legislation passed last year. I don't know if it's enough. I know for listening enough to Greta and the other people who have been sort of championing this, Al Gore going back to an inconvenient truth, TikTok. Speaking of TikTok, the clock is ticking, and Wally's very prescient today. It's like it's a good film to revisit, whether it's through Criterion or not, because it's like, that's right. That was how many years ago, and we haven't really curbed all that shit yet. So maybe we need to rediscover it and think about it again.
Well, I mean, I'm again going back to hope. I mean,
Yeah,
for as much as there are, problems with the planet that people are contributing to, there are people who are actively working on the problem.
that's right.
So I think technology, I mean, just look at where technology has come in the last 100 years. I mean, you couldn't have predicted 100 years ago that we would be carrying around the sum of human knowledge in our pockets
Right.
and using it to make TikTok videos.
Well,
Um,
but
but
I mean, look
no,
at electric cars. They complained about electric cars. Oh, they're so expensive. We still have to have oil and all that to fuel our homes. Right. But the future is electric. And one out of every two cars sold today is a hybrid. And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So a lot can change in 10 years. So let's keep moving forward. Yes, it's
oh, sure.
expensive now, but ultimately, if we get there, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. That's progress. That's where it's going to go. And I'm all for helping us get there as soon as possible. And don't leave everybody behind, but don't cling to, and they used to say like glorious coal, we're going to bring back glorious coal and all that kind of stuff. Remember that in 2016? Do you know that there's more people who work at Boston Market, which I think is like number 17 in the fast food chains, than work in the coal industry in the United States? We're not bringing back coal. We're not going to bring back Boston Market either. I mean, I don't think that's going to ever quite get up there to the Taco Bell stage of being the threat coming at McDonald's. But this movie is kind of saying you got to start somewhere, you got to work, and you got to start applying it. And take an example from Wally. He's doing his part to clean up. I love it. Take care of what he can.
And that's a great way to put it. That cliche, you got to start somewhere. And, you're going back to what we were saying about Obama, who I think he got that, was it from Gandhi? I don't know. He was very popular with, be the change you want to see in the world.
That's right.
But one thing I want to close on this, and I don't mean this as any kind of a dig on Criterion or Pixar, but we're just talking about TikTok and the short attention span. This just got a great 4K release and a nice package, tons of extra features on it for film buffs. But our kids, is this a movie for middle-aged collectors who love animation, or is it a movie for kids? I mean, are people being born now, or say like 5-6-year-olds, are they going to sit still and watch a half hour, not even the whole movie? Are they going to get through the full first half hours? Like, he's driving around this dusty planet. He's putting cubes on top of each other. He's watching an old television. It's practically a black and white movie because the costumes are old timey. Like, what do you think of that? Is this, does Wally, is this an artifact, or what is this?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think, Blu-ray 10 years ago was the thing, and now, they can't really give them away. Although Criterion, by their level of taste and movies that they want to sort of focus on, I think still create enough buzz. But I'm with you. I think, unfortunately, and I could be proven wrong by certain numbers if they want to send them or share them with you, but my guess is the stuff that Criterion puts out is mostly for film buffs or people who are really on that level of wanting to see how it's made and get the extras and the backstories and the history of it and all that. Again, though, sometimes they discover stuff. Like I'm always amazed when I talk to young kids and I'll say like, well, what shows do you watch on TV? What do you love? And they'll say The Simpsons. It's like, wow, it's in its 30th year now. And that was like the hot show. And I was just out of college or whatever the hell that was so many years ago, a few years past college, but nonetheless. So, maybe they discover some things that we would be surprised they discover. I'm not sure they're going to go back and discover Charlie Chaplin or care about Harold Lloyd or Buster Keaton or Fatty Arbuckle, but maybe they will say, yeah, Wally, that's like a classic from how many years ago? And we'll say, well, it's kind of a modern classic, but I mean, I talked to people about, the greatest period of films for me was always the 70s. I mean, I could literally list 60 films off the top of my head that were like amazing films done in the 70s. And I've talked to people in their 20s and they go, oh, old time movies. It's like old time movies to me are like the 1930s, but yeah, that's 50 years ago to a lot of those people. So yeah, that is old.
Yeah,
but I would love to think that kids and young people would watch this and have the wherewithal to sit there and watch this unusual storytelling done. But maybe with our AD, attention deficit order kind of TikTok-y world, maybe that's too much to ask. I don't know.
Well, it just occurred to me that, for a lot of folks, I mean, who have kids, I imagine probably have Disney Plus, and this is on Disney Plus. I guarantee you the rest of the Pixar catalog. So maybe I answered my own question. The Criterion Pixar release is for the collectors, and for the kids, they can watch it on Disney Plus. Maybe the parents will put this on, but if they happen to have the disc. But yeah, it's a strange thing because it is something that you can get for free. But as we were kind of talking, I think before we started recording, really, I do that featured extras segment because I love the extra features on physical media, which you don't get on streaming services or digital downloads a lot of the time. So yeah, it's an interesting model to think about.
See, I think the one thing that I always worry a little bit about, and I probably sound like John Meacham right here, but I do worry that we're losing history. Like that's not really given the emphasis in school anymore, and a lot of people don't want to tell the story of history because it's not always flattering. But whether it's the history of the movies, or history of America, or I don't know, history of fashion, or whatever you want to call it, history of music, it's important to have that, and it can't just be stuff that's only been in the last 10 years. It's funny, like the American Music Awards are coming up, and Lionel Richie is getting the Icon Award, and he doesn't seem that old to me, even though he is, and he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and all that. But his time was 30, 40 years ago where he was the big thing. And but he shouldn't be forgotten, and I guess if he's considered to be like, the way we used to think of Sinatra when we were kids, or some of those people from yesteryear, so be it. Those are the new sort of classics and stuff, just as Wally may be considered a little bit of a modern or somewhat dated classic now for some generations. But I just hope we don't lose the sense of that, because I know it's cornbally to say those who fail to remember history are condemned to repeat it, but we have to remember stuff, and we have to value age and yesteryear and that which was done before. I mean, people will say like, what do you think is the greatest superhero movie, Jeff? And I'll say, well, I may be old school, and maybe this is flying in the face and thwarting MCU, but I will say Superman. And they go, oh, that looks so corny, and the flying is bad. And yeah, sometimes Christopher Reeve's suit is even green. I don't know how they didn't fix that in post, but they didn't. But yeah, the tagline was, "You will believe a man can fly," and at that time, you did believe a man could fly, because some of those scenes were really well done, and it was a clever film, and it set the sort of the template for everything else to follow. And just because it was done in the late 70s doesn't mean it's a piece of crap compared to all the better CGI today. It's like storytelling. Good storytelling is good storytelling. That's what Pixar has remembered, whether they're telling it with anthropomorphic machines or The Incredibles.
Well, I can testify firsthand experience. I watched the original Superman, actually Superman 1 through 4, with my youngest, who was 4, just turning 5, and he loved, Superman 78. So yeah, I'm hopeful
Well, that's
there.
great. There you go. I love that. Yeah.
I just had a horrible thought. You said the American Music Awards coming up, and Lionel Richie's getting, inducted into their Icon
Some sort of
Award.
icon, yeah, word, I think it is, yeah.
There's got to be someone somewhere, probably a Gen Zer, and I don't mean to knock Gen Z, but I'm going to, who's probably going to say, "See, Mom, I told you you could be an icon if you just become famous. I mean, he was just a judge on American Idol, and look what happened."
Right. See, that's the reference point for a lot of people, isn't it? Like, oh, he had a whole career as a what, a Commodore? Was he in the Navy? Well, folks.
Commodore, isn't that was that old gaming system, right? He was part of he was number 63 on
That's
Commodore
right.
64.
That's right. I do love gamers though, when you say to them, what's, they'll still do like the best games ever, and they'll still say the first person shooter GoldenEye game was 95, but that still gets in the top 10. It's like, yeah, that was a pretty good game. Yeah, you have your Call of Duty, and there've been 6 of those now, or how many, whatever, but you can't knock some of the old school stuff. I mean, The Wizard of Oz is still popular. I think kids still watch that, and um, you have to put that in a little bit of context, but it's still a great story. It still moves you, and great songs and clever characters and everything else. I don't know. I'm very forgiving of older special effects or older production values and stuff, even in television shows like Columbo. I mean, that's still one of the greatest characters, detectives, and versions of mysteries to tell you who the killer is. And then we just have to sort of match wits and see if we figure it out in the same way that Columbo does. And yet Universal spent no money on those shows. They look terrible. They're overlit. I mean, Airplane did a whole parody of that. It's like, that was the Universal look, whether it was Airport or Columbo or whatever. But those production values don't take away from, there's still a really good story there with some very good characters. So I hope newer generations are as forgiving of some of those maybe shortcomings just because of the time period.
Oh, they won't be, because if it's not digital,
What do you
if it's
think of
not
Jeff?
digital, then right,
See,
it's
I'm trying to be
garbage. No.
positive. I'm trying to be positive. Like, Wally ended positive, even though it was scathing, but it ended positive. So I'm trying to hope for the next generation that they will look beyond the rust and the old and say, we can rebuild. We can appreciate the fact that this land can grow a seedling now.
Well, okay, I'm going to join you in that positivity just so we can end on a happy high note. So yes, go humanity. And we're going to go Jeff, thank you again for hanging out. This is a tremendous conversation. We're going to have several more because this has been a blast. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm anytime. Give me a call.
All right. I
I'm moving
will.
in
And
next week, Ian. I'm moving in next week.
I got to clear off some shelf space then. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to stay positive.
We are brothers from another mother or something. I just know we're two Kingsmen, more than brothers.
All right, man. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, Ian. Bye.
All right. See ya. Bye.